Welcome to Careers Takeoff, where you learn the latest about how you can get ahead in your career. I'm your host, Conrad Chua. Welcome to Careers Takeoff. I'm Conrad Chua. So happy to see you join the show today. And if you're new, remember you can type in your comments or questions in the chat forum, right? Whether you're watching this on Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn. Today, I'm really excited because after more than a year doing this live stream, this is the first time that I'm doing it with a guest physically in the same room. So this is a great, you joined at a really exciting sort of episode. And today there's no pressure on me except that I've got, my guest is actually an Emmy award winning producer. Quite some time ago, some years ago, I think. But today, Stephen Lyle, he is an alum. He's also a PhD student here. He's going to talk about social media and the impact on journalism. So, welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And clarification, my company won the Emmy Award. We just get to, founders show up and take credit for everything.
But you went on stage.
No, we didn't.
You didn't get on stage?
Technical Emmys are done like some, you go to some place and they just give it to you. It's not, you don't show up on the TV cameras. Only ones, the main categories like Best Actor, Best TV Show, Best Drama, Best Comedy Series. And the technical awards either happen, a day before or a day after or something like that. Yeah, we're like the kind of the lesser Emmys. But
okay, but at least you got to get into
yes.
the...
Oh, yes. It's on the
resume.
Hall.
It's on the resume. They didn't just email it to you.
No, we have the award.
Okay. So you got your Emmy in sort of broadcast.
Yes.
Broadcast.
Yeah, interactive broadcast, right?
Right.
TV.
Yeah, in Major League Baseball.
That's right. Major League Baseball. We did the first simulcast within one channel, 6 megahertz channel. You could watch 6 Major League Baseball games, but then you could interact with them. Remember, this is way back in 2005, 2006, long time ago, pre-mobile, right? Because we always interact with mobile now. And then we also did the 2008 Olympics for NBC, and we're the first to ever do that. And we essentially were vanguards, in I would call it emerging TV tech.
Right, yeah. And this is important because Stephen will talk a lot about today, where TV, where journalism can be a force for good, right? In the face of what we see in social media. Before we go there, wanted to give a shout out to some of our viewers and a reminder, if you can put in the comments field where you're watching us today. So first we have Lucy from Lagos. And I think Lagos will be quite interesting because I know Stephen's got big interest in terms of truth and news in developing countries. He's going to talk a lot about that later on. Yeha is from Egypt, another place I think Stephen's going to be interested in.
Yes.
Yeah. Irene's from Greece, and Vicky's from Taiwan, and Vicky's been a long time friend of the show. So, Stephen, do you want to start off by talking about social media, the impact on journalism, good, bad?
Yes. Well, of course, anybody that's using social media as a consumer, as a user, there are many things that we like about it, and there are lots of positives. But when we look at the impact of social media on journalism, I think it's a very different story. I talk about it now as the changing agency of journalism. Journalists used to be purely the storytellers, and now they've had to evolve to conversation facilitators. So social media has sparked what I call a punctuational change in journalism. It's important to clarify, by the way, because we have people from different marketplaces, different geographies, that this, I really focus our discussion on societies where information is free, and we have free journalism, because that's not the same for every society, and so it's very important. But social media's rise as a news aggregator has electrified journalistic evolution from its near 100-year stasis in the broadcast era, and I mean like radio and TV as the traditional platforms. But they were proactive, single source content creators with unidirectionally, a one-way direction, single channel distribution to audiences like from our parents and our grandparents, credulous and silenced audiences. They had no opportunity to respond. So the dawn of the internet, however, catalyzed this what I call punctuated change, which is rapid evolution, away from the broadcast era attributes to a more dynamic organism that we see today in social media with supercharged attributes, a reactive multi-sourced content creator with bi-directional multi-channel distribution to hyper-aware, rapidly reactive audiences who are armed on social media with real-time response mechanisms. So this punctuated change significantly shifted the balance of information power away from the traditional media towards the audiences. The audiences, they have more of the power. This could be a good thing. This could be a bad thing, right? As we begin to look at it. So news media was for generations the nucleus of content creation, with audiences distantly removed, to outer valences, and the pure capacity as an information consumer. But today, this bidirectionality of content creation pits news media, the professionally produced content, against user-generated content, what we know as UGC. Newsroom editors now are relegated to reactive posture in response to UGC and more of a validation, verification modes in this new form of participatory journalism.
Yeah, I'm reminded of this because in one of our previous live streams, we talked about, we had two alums, right, who worked in publishing media, and they were talking about how the work of a journalist had to change so quickly because one person was worked in Business Times in Singapore. They only published on the weekdays, right? So reporters, journalists, they had the weekend off. But now people need to be on all the time. So I thought that was quite interesting because that meant not just the change in the work, I think, of a journalist being on all the time and having to be quite reactive as well. So I see on Twitter, suddenly we have people who I read on Financial Times. Now they are actually writing like tweets in response to real-time news, right? So that's changing the work, but it also changes the economics of news because before you had journalists who could be given the time to really research a story, but now that's the economics means that you can't support that. How do you think journalism is kind of responded to these changes brought about by social media, by people always being on all the time?
Well, it's particularly poignant when you get into breaking news. Smartphones, Facebook and Twitter, UGC has proven far more agile.
And UGC is
user-generated content.
Okay.
So that kind of content is much more agile than broadcast journalists are used to. So no terrorist attack or car accident or ill-timed politician misspeak or a malapropos, or even a big league score if you're at a rugby match or at a baseball game in the United States. The crowd is littered with millions of red light indicators. The cameras are going, right? So this content is captured and posted in real time and then reshared by millions of users, oftentimes before broadcast news even gets the lead. So, broadcast news feeds, you're being broadcast in news media are frequently licensed user-generated content. It's like if you saw a house on fire in the neighborhood, you're going to have that information, you're going to have that content available. A local news reporter would take an hour to get the microwave truck out to the neighborhood to see the fire. But here's Conrad with his iPhone and he's live streaming. So this has changed. They're more in a reactive mode. I call this the loss of agency. Journalism has lost loss of agency. It's the greatest punctuational change is they've lost the nucleus position. They're more in a reactive mode. I can talk about more punctuational changes later on. You brought something else up that I kind of want to highlight on, and it's the other major impact on it has to do with the economics. So if most people are using social media now to access breaking news or first news, then you need to get into the business model of social media. And this gets into the subject of attention economics, which is not an old economic term. It was introduced in 1971 by psychologist and economist Herbert Simon, and he basically lays out an argument that essentially says society is simply burdened with too much information. In an information-rich world, the wealth of information means that there's a dearth of something else, a scarcity of whatever it is that information consumes. So whatever information consumes is rather obvious. It consumes our attention. So if you have too much information, then we're losing your attention. So you see the problem here. So you get into Facebook, back to Facebook's business model. It's engineered to capitalize on attention economics. So we're a narcissistic species. Humanity is so innate. Just our nature. We want to see and hear from people like us, right? So Facebook's mission is to connect users with similar users. All social media platform engines are therefore what they call homophilous in nature. So we like to be connected to people who like the same things as us, homophilous, right? And so Facebook is like a homophilous router and connector, all right? Users get routed into clusters segmented via demographics, psychographic, geographic, behavioral markets, all right? So a user's FaceTime friends are usually typically a hall of mirrors. You're seeing people that are like yourself, right? It's homophilous in nature, people like me. And this is where filter bubbles start to get created. We've heard this term, but it's just an ideological echo chamber that results in this homophilous vortex, right? And this is one of the problems that we have. So simply stated, we're more interested in getting content that's agreeable, right? Facebook would rather put a news article into our feed that makes us feel better, not what we need. We're more likely to see what we like or what we need or what our friends like or what our friends need. So simply stated, like fake news as a result, and what I call hillbilly science, travels much faster than science and real news. And even when it's overtly fake, it travels so fast that the countermeasures at Facebook and Twitter can't even keep up. And then there are what I call aggressive disinformation engines, like particularly from foreign governments, which will remain unnamed. The bots that they have created, the countermeasures can't keep up. And there are countermeasure bots, believe it or not. It's quite a complex technology.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. Really, this idea of what is truth in a way. When I went back to Singapore in 2021, hadn't been back for a while because of the pandemic, and I was really surprised at that point how a lot of my generation, our parents, have suddenly become almost radicalized in a way. I think it's not almost. They have been radicalized through watching. They're retired. They spend all day in front of the TV watching cable news, reading stuff on WhatsApp, the WhatsApp groups, WeChat, and Facebook. That's how they be tipped in. People who I respected, obviously the parents and stuff, but they now became anti-vaxxers. They were conspiracy theorists, and it's just really shocking to me that that's happened kind of under the radar in a way. So what's your take in terms of how social media, all these, even some of the broadcast news, the way that they've given voice to some of these fringe elements, have really changed what it means to be, what truth actually means anymore?
Well, that's a very interesting subject, and I wish we had hours to talk about it. One of the things I say many times in other speaking engagements is how ironic that the information age has produced arguably the most misinformed generation since the dawn of print. That's a strange form of irony. So let's get into this term, post-truth. It's become, post-truth term has become so mainstream in pop culture that it was anointed by Oxford University in 2016 as the word of the year. And they even went on to provide a working definition. And here it is: a time when objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. This also relates to the subject of a book that I've co-authored with some other scholars. Shaz Ansari from Cambridge University is also involved in that is relating to, it's about science denial, causes and effects. It's coming out on Stanford University Press in the second quarter of 2023. And the whole issue of science denial, of course, that's not a new thing, and it's been around, because we're talking about post-truth, but there was a challenge with truth, in the pre-information age, even getting back to pre-print, as far back as Galileo, in the first major challenge to the flat Earth theory, if we remember correctly. But Galileo himself, he would have been struck with incredulity that the 21st century has produced a flat Earth society after all that hard work. Satellite imagery be damned, right? In the modern age, it's ironic that we see these manifestations where something like that in the post-truth era can find, a light. I'd like to get back to Facebook's business model here because, we're talking about post-truth, but we're also talking I want to talk about kind of the black hole dynamics of social media as a player in the news. I can tell you from having spent working on this in my doctorate that the weight of academic literature strongly indicates that the global spread of fake news and science denial is principally a social media phenomenon. So let's assert that emphatically. It's an algorithmically driven downward spiral, and I call it black hole dynamics, replete with increasing gravitational pull and density. Misinformation's allure and density increase with every time you go down, right? Maximum density, which is the final resting place in this black hole, is reached when you attain total reality inversion. And we're seeing this in society. I'll give you an example of reality inversions. Global warming is a myth. COVID-19 vaccines are more dangerous than the actual virus. Here's another one. Eliminating or defunding the police will make society more safe, right? These are inverted realities, by the way, that represent both poles of the political continuum. This is not a uniquely conservative thing or uniquely a progressive thing. You see it on both sides. If you can just take a step back and be objective, it's not just a bunch of hillbillies, in overalls with gun racks that are misinformed. We see misinformation happening all across the political spectrum. So as long as, and this is the most emphatic thing I want to say about the black hole dynamics of social media as a player in journalism, as long as the business model of journalism requires audiences to be preyed upon by deep learning technologies, then segmented into individual targets around demographic, psychographic, geographics, converted into inventory, and sold on the open market to the highest bidders to be monetized at an individual level, journalism will never be restored as a positive, enduring cultural impact on societies that it once had before the dawn of social media. As long as we are product, news will not ever be trusted again. We need a different approach to the news.
So are you talking about going back to the time when you had, let's say, you still have the Washington Post, the New York Times, Financial Times, the Times here, a couple of very well-respected newspapers that had the financial resource. Well, they had the audience, they had the financial resources through advertisers, through subscriptions, to fund quality journalists. I mean, is this just going back to what we had before Facebook?
Well, I think there might be some elements of that. What did we like back in the day? We used to have a trusted relationship with journalism. And one of the punctuated changes, rapid evolution, is that most of society does not trust mainstream journalism. Okay, how is it that somebody like CNN, who tries to launch a mobile app for $6 a month called CNN Plus, how is it that it failed? It started this year at the end of March. By the end of April, it went out of business. Okay, in 1 month, $100 million gone. Right, huge embarrassment. So part of the problem might be that CNN, along with the BBC, NBC, Fox News, all the mainstay players, I'd say legacy players, are just not trusted. And so what happened? What happened, right? So I think that there was something that we liked before social media, but now all of a sudden we don't like it. And so that's a very interesting phenomenon. I do think that we can look at some, I think we can look at some old and new. I had a list of attributes that I believe that's happening now, but that will continue to happen in the future, where I think news media, but particularly broadcast news, because I'm really more focused on video journalism. I love electronic print. I consume more electronic print than anything, and you probably do too. But there is a time for and a place for video journalism. In fact, in certain marketplaces, I'll talk about that. It has to be video journalism. So I'll talk about the first thing that we are seeing right now. It's the rise of podcasts. This is a podcast, by the way, and there are elements of podcasts that we really, really like. So you can find podcasts on YouTube, Spotify, Substack, Apple. It runs the whole gambit. But here are some sampling of across the political continuum of podcasts. Whether you're progressive, moderate, conservative, the progressive side, you have the Young Turks, The Problem with Jon Stewart, Pod Save America. In the middle ground, the moderate, independent, I would even add maybe libertarian in there. The Joe Rogan Experience. Bill Maher's a comedian. He said, I still identify as a progressive, but now the marketplace is calling me something not that. So I must be a moderate. And then on the right, and I say within the bell curve, I keep alt left and alt right out of there. More the conservative voices like a Ben Shapiro show, Mark Levin show, these kinds of shows. But why are they popular? This is a very interesting question. And because the information age, it gives us too much information, social media almost too much information. A podcast, and we all have our favorite podcasts, our favorite YouTube channels. I talk about the power of the drive shaft here. If an automobile, so podcast journalism is demonstrated audience affinity for depth and color behind stories. And you and I were talking about this just before we began the broadcast. There's a growing appetite for something more than gloss news storytelling. And here the concept of a differential's role and a drive shaft of an automobile comes into play. So a differential in a car, it allows the propelling tires to spin at different rates. Otherwise, one tire would always skid or lock up when you're going around turns. Well, many news stories are full of bends and turns, and we don't all travel at the same speed. Some of us lock up. So not all audiences can maintain the pace of a story, or they might be ideologically anchored, so they're locked up. They need color and depth of insight to gain broader perspectives and ultimately acquire informed insights into various stories, particularly those that might be politically charged. Well, this is what podcast news stories do. And I love the example that you gave of a story in Ukraine where you had military experts talking about what's wrong with these vehicles. Why are they not functioning according to the Russian expectations? Well, that depth of expert insight, that's not a journalist talking. And that's not just some UGC, user-generated content, somebody with a political objective that they're trying to achieve. This is an expert saying, well, here's the problem, and this is from my many years of experience. And then we feel enlightened that that's an angle I didn't hear before. So there's this yearning and appetite for depth and breadth and color.
And in going back to that example, this was in the early days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and now we see that in the Ukraine counteroffensive, where actually these experts were probably people that no one in the mainstream media would have thought of to call. They would have called a retired army general, right?
Yeah.
And the retired army general was saying, there's no way the Ukrainians could withstand this.
Yeah.
But these guys were defense contractors, people all who've had lots of experience working with vehicles, and they're like looking at the pictures and saying, something's not quite right. There's something fundamentally wrong with the Russian military. And I thought it was really kind of interesting because they started to get such a big online audience that they started getting interviewed on the likes of ABC, right? And they became the experts.
Yeah.
So it's kind of really interesting how, in a way, the internet allows people, true experts to rise, because they don't go through that filter or curation sort of process. But on the other hand, it also means there's a risk, isn't it, that you get bad actors. They could be malicious actors. They could be they want to do this because they're funded in a certain way, or they're just maybe naive. Yeah. But then their news can spread as well. So how do you think, in a way, looking forward, how do you think we can balance that so we get more of the good and less of that bad?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. Because what you're really getting into, which is something I've been writing about and I've been researching about as part of my dissertation, which is related to streaming news. What does the platform of the future look like? And this element that we're talking about, having expert voices involved in a conversation in a news feed, is a form of very human curation. So I would like to see news getting back to being produced again, by real people. Okay, and I'm going to throw out some other features that I think are very, very important. That it's going to play out what you said. I think, and I'm really focused on video journalism. It's a medium that reaches some of the most important geographies in the world. And I'll tell you why soon, but it needs to be free. Now, CNN Plus, right, is almost free, $6 a month, but even at $6 a month, they couldn't even achieve 10,000 users, which is 0.0 on the Nielsen scale, right? That's a flatline EKG, you're dead on arrival. So that's an example. Even the brand name CNN didn't help. In fact, I actually believe that those brands are negative in the mindset of the target audiences, Gens X, Y, and Z. All right. The platform of the future for journalism, it must generate revenue outside of the mainstream media and the attention economy practices that I've discussed. Take a look at Pandora and Spotify. So I've been researching their business models because the success of freemium ad-sponsored music, with even a cost of goods sold, which is up to 50%, they have to license this music to make it available to you for free or freemium. This could elegantly map over to a broadcast news media, particularly when it's user-generated content from prosumers who might be citizen journalists. This is what they do for a living. To people like you or me, if we were at Notre Dame, it was burning. We could be geolocated on Twitter, a link could be set to us, and we could be brought into a live feed, which is controlled by a person and a production room. So I think that's very, very important. And so we're looking at those business models and how they could map over elegantly to a streaming news platform, basically like a Netflix app. All right.
And I think that's really important because, again, in the live stream that we did some months ago, we were trying to talk about, is there a business model for local news? Because we talk about the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the big news stories like Ukraine and stuff. But actually, there's a big gap for local news. And if what you're saying can succeed, you'd be better than Warren Buffett. Because Warren Buffett basically sold off all his newspapers because he's like, I can't make this work.
Well, here's the irony. And a lot of people don't realize this, that broadcast journalism is the number one ad revenue in broadcast TV.
Mm.
It was more than the best series ever, more than Mad Men, more than 30 Rock. It's because it's on every night, not one night a week, okay? It's on every night. And when you get into what viewers are interested in, they're first interested in local news. What's happening in Cambridge, around in Cambridgeshire? What's happening in our backyard? I'm also from Portland, Oregon. So what's happening in Portland? All right. If you're Los Angeles, you're interested in what's happening in Los Angeles. So if there was a car accident somewhere on the way to work, why is traffic stopped? Well, I can use my GPS. I can get a little alert there. But then I might be able to get something even more interesting. Is that, well, there was a multi-car pileup, and there are people there generating live streams that could be curated by a local news office. But how do you get that for free?
Mm-hmm.
All right, because you can't. It's not available to you. You can go try, but it's not. It's not out there. So I totally agree with you. Local matters. And in order for it to be local, though, it has to be part of maybe something bigger, all right? Because you have economy of scales issues that are starting to kick in. I think also that the platform of the future needs to be millennially, produced and targeted. I think millennial audiences, they want to see news produced by millennials, right? I hate to say that, but that's how it is. They want to hear fresh voices. They don't want to see their dad's news, or their grandfather's news. Okay, they're very keen on having this, right? So we're starting to look at maybe why we're seeing, according to Pew Research, trust in news media is below. It's below 50%. This is shocking, right? But trust in scientists and academics is up. We're still a trustworthy source. So maybe there's something there for us, and we're looking at how maybe academia, maybe a syndicated network of universities where you have broadcast nodes, where universities at every level. So an example, Cambridge, maybe Cambridge University could be a broadcast node, and they're tapping into local news feeds, but they're also tapping into a global news feed. So these are things that we're looking at. So architecture really does matter, and target audience and producers matter. And so Gens X, Y, and Z want to see Gens X, Y, and Z producing content for them. I also think this generation likes a stripped down UX, all right? All this fancy pants stuff that you see on, BBC, Fox News, MSNBC, these really graphic chyrons, animations, swoosh sounds. It's headache inducing. Some of these podcasts, however, they're produced out of somebody's garage. I see that sometimes they're in a closet. Like we're just in a small room here. There's something curiously trustworthy about that. You're not trying to manipulate me with sounds and chyrons all over the place. Hey, we're here to give you the information, all right?
And the thing about podcasting is that, in a way, it's a very intimate experience because, as someone said, you're actually putting someone else in your ear. I mean, that's as close as you can get, right? Because especially with these noise-canceling ear headphones or AirPods, someone's just whispering in your ear. And after a while, I think that's how a lot of people begin to become very credible in the podcasting world or through streaming, where they obviously are experts, but they come across as really authentic, and you can build that relationship in a way that probably you never really did before when watching TV in a living room.
That's such a good point. When Pew Research has done a lot of surveying into this, why do people trust podcasts as a source? Right? There's research out. You can go to Pew Research and you can find it this year on podcasts, and you're hitting onto something. There's this personal relationship that you have with the podcaster. We refer to these as prosumers. They consume, but they also they might be expert amateurs, freelance journalist type people. They're informed. And many of them are even wise enough to incorporate experts into the discussion, right? So this is kind of what I'm thinking. Is that right? And it's kind of what you're doing with me right now. You're a very informed person, but you're
Thank you very much.
But you go to the edge and you ask somebody like me, who's this is all I do every day is focus on this. This is a very slow unpacking storytelling, but your audience has a relationship with you in a certain way, and we need to get back to that. We've lost that, and I think bringing people back. So I think news needs to be produced and curated by real people. I think artificial intelligence plays a role after the fact, right? I did talk about my focus on video journalism. It has to be video streaming. It is a very important thing, and I want to get into what I believe are some of the most important geographies. The reason why it needs to be video journalism and video streaming is you take a look at the sub-Saharan Africa, in fact, the whole African continent, right? You'll see similar in emerging markets in Southeast Asia, Latin America. The World Bank reports that the sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, has 65% illiteracy rates. So electronic print, they can't read, they can't read the news that's coming to them. They need sight and sound. That translates to 700 million plus people, right? That's 700 million people who are blind to electronic print media and utterly reliant upon news media that conveys stories using sight and sound, right? It's a very important thing. If you want to disrupt corrupt regimes in developing markets, bring the truth. Bring it in with sight and sound to people that now have an iPhone, a smartphone, an Android phone, and they have 4G and 3G, 4G and 5G. So the other reason why I'm very interested in streaming is because I've been tracking mobile adoption since 2013. Every single year I'm looking at it. And we're approaching what I call the mobile singularity, which is we have 1 billion plus people in the developing markets that have now brought into the information age. So we have internet and information inclusion. In Africa alone, what has that meant? Oh wow, in the last 5 years, 40 million people have registered their birth for the first time. 40 million people have opened up a bank account. It's over 50 million people that have registered their birth. So 40 million people who have no access to a bank with a phone, with a cell phone like this, can open up a bank account and come into the economy. This is amazing. Now let's get information to them. Let's get them news about their country. That's local and global. Here's what the world is saying about my country. Here's what other people in my country are saying about my country, not just what the government is telling me about my country. And that's how you can disrupt in a very positive way what we saw in the Arab Spring. This is one of the positive impacts of social media. We were able to get information out really, really quick that helped disrupt, a regime.
And you actually did some work with students put up like a beta about this, right?
Yeah.
And I think we've got a video for that. Do you want to talk a bit about what that was before I play that?
Yeah. So we had a visiting scholar from Fraunhofer Institute in Germany. And why is that an important institute? Well, listen, if you're using MP3s or any compressed music, they invented that. Okay, so Fraunhofer is very well known in media technology as the player in Berlin, and he said, "Hey, I understand that you're researching the potential for disrupting broadcast journalism, on a global scale." And I said, "Yes. How can I help you?" He said, "Well, that would be a very fascinating graduate project. Could we help build out the app?" Remember, I'm talking about like a Netflix for the news type of application. And for me, it's all architecture. It's all in PowerPoint presentations. And so he said, "Hey, let us do the code, and we'd like to do the code, and then we'd do a working demo together." So that's exactly what we did. And I supervised a graduate team of 5 or 6 engineers, and I was enthralled by their passion about and desire about something new, something fresh from a video journalism standpoint. And they leaned in and did a wonderful job. And we would show it's a 2-minute clip.
Yeah, let's just show that.
Yeah.
Or false claims about everything from masks to social
The country is entering its second week of social disorder, one of the most turbulent periods it's seen in decades.
Encore 22 heures, quand plusieurs attaques meurtrières éclatent simultanément.
Alltagsbeschränkungen wegen der Corona-Pandemie. Zu dem Protest auch.
Desatadas por la muerte de Javier Ordóñez, un hombre que falleció tras ser sometido brutalmente por dos agentes.
So we have a question. Yeah, okay, so it's about wow, that's really cool. Did this this is still in beta, but it's a
Yes.
sort of a vision for the future, and I thought this was also a really nice way to address, hit up a question from Chris. Chris asks, "What are your views on addressing issues people have with bias and perceptions of bias, especially the sense of political fairness in news delivery?"
Lots of views on this, of course. Well, first thing, what journalism needs to do is just to come clean and say that we are political beings, and but we need to be more self-aware in terms of how we color a story. Headline news. When you see like the headlines in the newspaper, you can tell which direction sometimes the news is going to go in the story by the headline. And you can also, as a consumer of news, you can also maybe you can tell the political persuasion of this should not be the case. Journalism is not trying hard enough to produce journalism in a way that it's very difficult to tell if there's any political persuasion, that it's unbiased. But unfortunately, particularly during the Trump administration, is that news went off. The Trump election actually created this really toxic environment. Journalists lost control of themselves. And now in America, at least, journalists don't even pretend to be fair. They come right out and are very political up front. We've lost our way, lost our moorings. And somehow we need to get control of ourselves. That the journalism needs to get control of itself. So I think the most important issue with bias is to admit that you have it. And then after that, with rigor, producers, editors, and newsrooms need to sit down with their storytellers, with the reporters in the field and say, listen, first question I want you to ask yourself, am I being unbiased? Am I intentionally or unconsciously, have I accidentally advanced a narrative in just a car accident that I'm reporting, right? And I can give you an example of how to report a car accident the wrong way and the right way. So let's say there's a car accident at the intersection of 5th and Main. The story could go like this. There was just a car accident on 5th and Main. A black man driving a fast vehicle T-boned an old lady inside in the other car. well, that's horrifically biased. This is a horrific example. The way that story should be told. We've just learned that there is an accident at 5th and Main. One car has collided into another. We have learned that both people are fine and do not require hospitalization. More details to follow. Do you have any indication of my political bias in that story reporting? Just the facts, right?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how journalism is taught in schools, because the master of Selwyn College here in Cambridge, he worked in the BBC for many years, and he was talking a lot about how the BBC has to think about what is balance, because they've been accused of bias and liberal bias, and so it was very clear in the Brexit debate, for example, they would get one economist who was anti-Brexit and the one economist who was pro-Brexit, and they thought that's balance and gave them equal time, when actually 99 economists were anti-Brexit and there was just one guy. So what is that sort of balance? Steve, quickly, we've got a couple more questions I want to get through. So we've got Thana, who says, it's a comment. I think both social media and news are influenced by biased opinions, perspectives, and political direction. Trusting without a critical lens can be dangerous. It can lead to misinformation, consequently misconceptions. So that's her comment, and her question is, do you see an increase in misconceptions as a result of misinformation from giving everyone a voice on social media?
Yeah, it reminds me of a quote that I heard recently. It was at the MIT Social Media Summit last year. And basically the objective of the summit is how can social media fix itself as a player in the news? And I don't think that it will ever be able to do that, because it's addicted to attention economics, the way that it makes money. But what social media has done is it enables the amplification of extreme minority views that are on the fringe, to make them appear as though they're more of a mainstream opinion. The quote that I heard was, well, you have a right to your opinion, but you don't have a right to broadcast it at the highest decibels, like a social media bomb. You don't have the right to do that. And I think we've lost control of that. This is what I'm saying is the marketplace and Gens X, Y, and Z are very hungry for deep dives into stories, slower storytelling, with experts giving you color and insight is a very important thing. And back to your original point, the Brexit, there were two arguments, right? And there is a way to present the other side. This whole issue is called it's a syndrome called both-sidism. The intent is something honorable. You want to try to provide perspective, that there's another perspective in there, but be very careful when you're doing it that you don't miscommunicate that I don't want to hear the other side to slavery. For instance, there's no other side.
There were good people on both sides, right?
That's right. There are, yeah. So whereas with Brexit, we had, even in our own University of Cambridge community, I've had many discussions as you have. There were people that were pro and con on both sides of that. I do think that judgment is important. We need to get back to exercising good judgment, human curation. This question really has more to do with something that's running out of control on social media, and you can see the bias running. Yes, journalists have always been accused of bias before even broadcast news, before TV, before radio. You look at old print journalism and you're going to see bias, right? But human curation is still important, and I do believe that audiences will migrate to the most trustworthy sources. Ultimately, the market will find a place for that.
And on that optimistic note, we'll have to call it into this fascinating discussion with Stephen. Thank you so much, Stephen, for sharing your thoughts about how truth can prevail, whatever form we hope that is, in the face of social media and attention economics. Thank you everyone for joining. The next episode, it's on a slightly different time. It'll be next Thursday. Same 12:45 to 1:30. We'll be talking about fintech in Africa, and we have an alum, Oromei, who has worked in this field even before the word fintech came about. Right? She was working with one of the first fintech companies in Nigeria. It's since IPO'd, and so she will be talking about what is the opportunities and challenges that the continent as a whole, different regions, face when adopting fintech. So once again, please come and join us 29th September at 12:45. Thank you very much.